Hello everyone, Ace here, and today I've decided to have yet another look at some video game history, and in the process answer the question, what exactly made Command & Conquer Generals great?
In the modern world, great leaders resolve their conflicts with words. Shed launcher. Carbon bombing. Tomahawk missiles.
First released all the way back in February of 2003, and going on to be one of the most beloved entries in the entire Command & Conquer franchise, which itself is one of the most beloved and well-known RTS franchises of all time, it's safe to say that Command & Conquer Generals is a great game, which is a result that you might not necessarily have expected given the circumstances surrounding this game's development. At least on paper anyways. I say this because Command & Conquer Generals was the first game in the franchise that was not developed by Westwood Studios. Instead, it would be developed by EA Pacific, a company that even at the time of the game's release was already due to be absorbed into EA LA. And adding to this, I also have to bring up the fact that Command & Conquer Generals takes the franchise to a completely new setting, this time talking about the War on Terror, at a time where that was very much a hot topic. So at least when looking at this on paper, one could be forgiven for thinking at the time that Command & Conquer Generals was just going to be a quick cash grab, using the CNC name for some quick recognition, as well as moving the setting to a current hot topic just to get a few extra bucks out of it. However, obviously the end result was very much different from what you might expect given the circumstances. So with this in mind, let's move on to what exactly made Command & Conquer Generals great. And the first thing to note is that while this game wasn't actually developed by Westwood Studios, that's not to say that there weren't some veterans of the Command & Conquer franchise working on it. See, the truth is that EA Pacific was prior actually a part of Westwood known as Westwood Pacific, and under that name was best known for helping co-develop Command & Conquer Red Alert 2. And not only that, but Westwood Pacific was mainly involved in the game design part of Red Alert 2, whereas the main Westwood Studios company was primarily involved in the FMV cutscenes and stuff like that. In other words, while Command & Conquer Generals was the first Command & Conquer game not to be developed by Westwood Studios itself, it still, like I said, had some seasoned veterans of the CNC franchise. Most notably, the people who developed Red Alert 2 no less. So that would be the first thing that helped make Command & Conquer Generals great. But let's now move on to the second thing that made Command & Conquer Generals great. That being that it had some of the best timing of any video game ever created. Like I said, Command & Conquer Generals came out in February of 2003, and as many historians may note, the war in Iraq began in March of 2003. So when players booted up their games, selected the American campaign, and got to besiege Baghdad in the very first mission, only to then see the very real Battle of Baghdad play out very shortly after, it understandably caused the game to become massively popular very quickly, which leads me quite cleanly into the third thing that helped make Command & Conquer Generals great, that being that it was an early example of a game truly popularizing the modern warfare theme. Although technically speaking, the game was indeed set a full decade into the future at the time. Still, some of the game's methods of storytelling would be repeated in future games using the modern warfare theme, including, for example, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. So it's safe to say that Command & Conquer Generals had a big impact on where military-themed video games would end up going. But there is one additional element that I do need to bring up that helped make Command Command & Conquer Generals great, because I now have to talk about the voice lines within the game. Now, I think it's safe to say that RTS games are very well known for having some very memorable unit dialogue within them. However, Command & Conquer Generals took it to a completely new level, to the tune that it has some of the most memorable unit dialogue of any RTS game ever created, with the only other RTS that really competes with it in this regard being Dawn of War 1. The fact that the game has even some memeable notifications for getting unit upgrades, such as for example shouting AK-47s for everyone when you arm the mob as an upgrade, that's probably a good sign that people are going to remember your game quite well, especially when you combine it with some solid gameplay made by people who knew what they were doing, as well as some of the most based units of all time ever put into an RTS. Which brings me to the final thing that helped make Command & Conquer Generals great. The fact that it's a game that simply could never be made today. Between the silly dark humor of over-the-top units such as the Toxin Tractor, which shoots anthrax at people, the Chinese hackers, which fund the Chinese war machine by going onto the internet and scamming people out of their money, or some of the spicier abilities within the game, I think it's safe to say that Command & Conquer Generals is not politically correct. But if anything, that only helps further the game's charm in this day and age. And with all of this in mind, this has been Ace, and I hope you'll agree when I say that Command & Conquer Generals is great.